It was the summer of 1979 when Sister Agnes walked out of the small stone chapel at the edge of a forgotten village and vanished without a trace. One moment, she was tending to the church garden, humming softly to herself. The next, her presence was erased as if swallowed by the earth itself. No footprints, no farewell, just an open gate, a watering can still dripping, and a chapel left in haunting silence. For decades, the mystery of her disappearance weighed heavily over the village, whispered about in kitchens and behind closed church doors. But as the years passed, her name faded into folklore, a ghost of a woman, wrapped in habits and shadows. Locals made peace with the unanswered questions. Some said she ran away. Others believed something darker. But none could ever explain how someone so devoted, so rooted in faith and community, could vanish without a single trace. The chapel stood unchanged for decades, holding its silence like a tomb. Her room remained untouched. Her Bible, her rosary gone. Her final sermon, scribbled half-finished in a journal, ended mid-sentence, as if whatever came for her didn't even allow a goodbye. Then, 43 years later, something happened that shattered that silence forever. A young boy fishing by the riverbank pulled up an object tangled in reeds. It was heavy, soaked, and bound in a leather cover, so worn the name was barely visible. But inside, protected by the swollen pages, was something impossible. Sister Agnes's handwritten prayers, dated the day after she disappeared. The ink, blurred but readable, spoke of fear, of someone watching, of a secret she had discovered, one that should never be spoken aloud. The village was never the same after that Bible surfaced. What was once a cold case became a storm of suspicion. People who had stayed silent for decades began to remember things, small things, strange things, moments they had dismissed as unimportant, eyes that avoided meeting hers, doors that closed too quickly. The way Father Emmanuel never seemed surprised that she was gone. Whispers long buried came crawling back to life. And now, you're about to hear the full story. Not just of her disappearance, but of what she may have discovered. Because sometimes, when something holy goes missing, it's not heaven that has the answer. It's the river that returns what no one ever wanted found. The news of the Bible's discovery spread through the village like wildfire. For a place that had all but buried Sister Agnes's memory, the sudden return of her most sacred possession was like resurrecting a ghost. People gathered at the chapel, at the riverbank, in hushed groups outside the bakery and post office, each repeating the same question in different ways. How did her Bible end up here? And why now? The old priest, Father Emmanuel, claimed surprise, but those who watched closely saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the shadow of something unspoken tightening in his throat. For the younger villagers, it was just a curiosity, a strange relic from a past they'd never lived. But for those who remembered Agnes, the way she sang in the mornings, the warmth she brought to funerals and baptisms, the quiet sadness that lingered in her eyes, this was more than a mystery. It was unfinished grief. Her disappearance had never been explained, but it had always been accepted, until now. The Bible was undeniable, solid, real, and its reappearance forced a question that no one had dared ask for over 4 decades. What if she never left at all? The mayor called for an inspection of the chapel. An old cellar door, sealed shut for years due to crumbling steps and mold, was reopened. Dust billowed out like breath from the dead. Beneath the altar, behind shelves of forgotten hymnals and water-damaged scrolls, a box was found. Inside, letters. Dozens of them, all written by Sister Agnes. Most unfinished, many unread. Each page whispered fragments of something darker than anyone could have imagined. Concerns about a brotherhood inside the brotherhood. Mentions of secret meetings held after the bells had stopped ringing, and warnings about something she had found hidden in the church records. There was one letter that stood out. It had no date, no greeting, just one line, scratched in ink that had smeared from her trembling hand. If they find this, I am already gone. The room fell silent as it was read aloud. Even the skeptical priest who had replaced Emmanuel shifted uncomfortably in his robes. This was no longer a question of what happened to Sister Agnes, but of who had made it happen. The villagers stood divided. Some insisted it was all superstition, paranoia preserved in damp paper. Others whispered of things they had seen as children, candlelight flickering through the chapel windows in the dead of night, men in robes who entered through the side doors and never came out. And above them all, the bell tower stood still, as if waiting, watching for the next secret to come undone. The next morning, a group of locals returned to the river where the Bible had surfaced. It had rained overnight, and the water had risen, tugging at the reeds with quiet aggression. They found more pages, loose sheets that must have slipped free when the boy pulled the book ashore. One had a name, Father Emmanuel. Another, just a word, Sacrarium. The villagers didn't understand it. Latin, perhaps, an old religious term? But the old gravedigger, Tomas, who had served the church since he was a boy, turned pale when he saw it. Tomas hadn't spoken publicly in years, but that afternoon he did. With hands trembling and voice worn by time, he told a story that chilled the blood of everyone who listened. He spoke of how, in the late 70s, Sister Agnes had confided in him, not as a priest, but as a man who buried the town's sins. She had found something beneath the chapel floor during renovations. A sealed room, stone walls, no door from the inside. Inside, she told him, were relics, not of saints, but of rituals. Objects not meant for prayer, but for power. She had wanted to report it. She had even written to the archdiocese, but the letter never arrived. It was intercepted, he believed, by someone within the village. Someone who wore robes during the day, and something else entirely when night fell. After that, she changed. She stopped singing. She stopped walking home alone. And then she vanished. Just like that. No scream. No trace. Just gone. And no one asked why. Because asking meant becoming the next to disappear. That night, the chapel was broken into. The locals didn't admit to it, but the truth was written in muddy footprints and forced locks. They were looking for the sacrarium, the hidden room, the place Sister Agnes had feared, the place she had tried to expose. What they found was worse than they had imagined. Beneath the pulpit, under a slab of stone no one remembered being there, was a staircase, descending into cold, damp darkness. And at the bottom, a door. Thick, iron, sealed from the outside. It took hours to open it. The hinges screamed as light poured into the room for the first time in over 4 decades. What they saw inside made several of them turn away, clutching their mouths. Symbols etched into the walls. Remnants of robes. Wax circles. Burnt bones. And on the far wall, in faded paint, written in a hand that still trembled across time, "Deliver us from the ones who claim to be holy." The room had kept its secret until now. The discovery of the hidden chamber beneath the chapel shook the village to its core. For years, faith had been the foundation of this place, unquestioned, unchallenged. But now, that very foundation had cracked open to reveal something rotten beneath. People stopped going to Massachusetts, mothers pulled their children out of catechism. And Father Emmanuel, once respected and revered, became a ghost in his own town. He no longer led prayers. He no longer looked anyone in the eye. He locked his doors, closed the curtains, and waited. But truth doesn't sleep, and guilt doesn't stay silent. A week after the chamber was found, a local historian named Isabel uncovered something buried in the municipal archives, a series of land transfer documents from the early 20th century. They showed that the land the chapel was built on had once belonged to a secretive religious order dissolved in 1921 for reasons the Vatican never disclosed. The name of that order? Ordo Sacrarii, the Order of the Sacred Vault, the Sacrarium. Isabel's discovery spread quickly, connecting dots no one had thought to connect. The village chapel wasn't just a place of worship. It was built on top of something ancient, something deliberately buried. And Sister Agnes, it seemed, had unearthed part of that forbidden history. Her notes, though fragmented and damaged, spoke of rituals disguised as vigils, of names she found erased from church logs, of disappearances long before her own. What she found wasn't an isolated horror. It was a pattern. As tension mounted, another detail emerged, a registry entry dated just days before Sister Agnes vanished. It listed a delivery to the church from a private estate outside the village. No description, just a coded entry and a signature, E. Laurentius. No one in the village knew that name, but an elderly nun from a nearby convent did. She remembered Laurentius, not as a priest, but as a scholar of forbidden texts. a man excommunicated in 1964 for heretical teachings, and rumored to have vanished himself shortly after. The question now wasn't just what had happened to Sister Agnes. It was how deep the roots of this mystery went, and whether the discovery of her Bible had been coincidence or something much more deliberate. Because some truths, once uncovered, don't just explain the past, they awaken it. Fear settled over the village like fog. People avoided the chapel entirely. Others left town without saying a word. Those who stayed began locking their doors at sunset. Whispers of curses and hauntings returned, the kind of stories children told for fun, now spoken by trembling adults. But not everyone ran. A small group, led by Isabel and Tomas, committed themselves to uncovering everything. Not for vengeance, but for Sister Agnes, for the truth she tried to speak, and the silence that killed her. They returned to the underground chamber, this time documenting everything. Every marking on the wall, every object. They found a hidden drawer behind a false stone in the altar's base. Inside it, more pages from Agnes's Bible, pages that hadn't been damaged by water. Preserved, protected. On one of them, a single sentence written in a different hand. We keep what God has forgotten. Below it, a symbol, the same one found on the robes in the chamber, and the same one now carved into the old bell in the tower, hidden behind rust, only visible when light hit it just right. But the strangest find was a second staircase, one that led deeper. At first, they thought it was just a drainage shaft, but it wasn't. The steps were smooth, worn by time, leading to a second vault, smaller, colder. This room had no markings, no bones, no relics, just a single chair in the center, bolted to the floor, and a small, rusted box placed in front of it. Inside the box, a cloth pouch, and within it a human tooth. DNA testing would later confirm it belonged to a young girl who had gone missing from a nearby village in 1968. A girl who had never been associated with the church, whose disappearance had been written off as an accident near the river. And yet, her remains were here, beneath this chapel, beneath this village, beneath their prayers. As the truth deepened, so did the silence from the church authorities. Letters were sent, phone calls made. None returned. Father Emmanuel resigned without warning and disappeared 2 nights later. His house was found empty, the windows open, a single candle burning on the table, and one of Sister Agnes's torn letters left beside it, folded into the shape of a cross. The message was clear. The past had finally caught up to the present, and the present was unraveling. With Father Emmanuel gone, the town was left in a vacuum, spiritually, socially, and psychologically. No one volunteered to take his place. The chapel remained closed. Candles at the altar burned out, and for the first time in living memory, the church bells didn't ring on Sunday morning. The village felt hollow, like something sacred had been drained from its bones. But for those still chasing the truth, that silence was confirmation. Confirmation that what had been hidden wasn't just historical. It was still active. Isabel kept digging. In one of her late-night reviews of archived village records, she found something that hadn't been logged properly, a private deed to a patch of forest bordering the river, signed in 1978 by a now-deceased cardinal. The land had never been built on, never registered for public use. It was a quiet, forgotten corner. But Sister Agnes had written about it once in the margins of her journal. The river hides more than water. Follow the roots. It sounded poetic, until now. They went to that patch of forest. Isabel, Tomas, and 2 others. The trees that were older, twisted, tangled in ways that felt unnatural. The ground was soft, almost too soft, as if something beneath was still breathing. A half-buried stone structure rose from the earth like a broken tooth, moss-covered and crumbling. It looked like the remains of a shrine, but it wasn't holy. Carvings lined its base, some eroded by time, others freshly etched. The same symbol. Again, in the center of the stone was a hole, about the size of a child's head. When Tomas peered in with a flashlight, what he saw made him fall back in horror. Bones, dozens of them, arranged in a spiral, and at the center, perfectly intact, was another Bible, not Agnes's this time. Older, much older. The leather binding was branded with iron, the cross twisted and malformed, and inside it were prayers not written in Latin, but in something else entirely. a language no one could immediately recognize. Back in the village, Isabel sent photos of the script to a linguistics expert she knew from university. He responded within hours, not with a translation, but with a warning. The language, he said, wasn't recorded in any standard archive. It appeared to be a hybrid of Latin, Aramaic, and Proto-Celtic, a constructed dialect. This wasn't meant to be read by outsiders, he wrote. And if it was meant to be obeyed. News of the forest shrine, or what some now call the altar pit, didn't stay secret for long. Someone leaked the photos online. Within days, conspiracy forums caught fire. Paranormal bloggers claimed the village was cursed. Religious scholars debated whether this was evidence of a rogue sect. But for the villagers, it wasn't theory. It was home. And suddenly, the outside world was watching a place that had spent decades trying to be forgotten. Journalists arrived. Cameras, drones, flashing lights that lit up the same river where a child once found a Bible tangled in reeds. The village mayor, overwhelmed and cornered, issued a statement claiming the findings were being sensationalized and under investigation. But the damage was done. The veil had been torn. And when light hits something that's lived in the dark for too long, it doesn't just reveal, it burns. That night, fires broke out in 3 places: the edge of the forest, the side of the chapel, and the mayor's own home. No one was hurt, but the message was unmistakable. Someone was trying to erase what had been exposed, to cauterize the wound before it spread further. Tomas, now visibly shaken, said something no one wanted to hear. They're not protecting the church. They're protecting something much older than the church ever was. Isabel, fearing for her life, encrypted all the files she had collected and uploaded them to multiple cloud servers. But before she went completely silent, she released one final video. In it, she read one of Agnes's last letters aloud. The nun had written, "They made me promise to stay quiet. But how can one stay silent when God no longer walks these halls? Only echoes remain, and something else that wears his name like a mask." The screen faded to black. The video ended, but the chill it left behind lingered. And then, something strange happened. People began reporting sightings. A figure in white, seen near the river at dawn. A woman walking barefoot through the trees, her veil soaked, her hands clasped in prayer. No one could say for sure, but everyone knew who it looked like. Sister Agnes. The reports of the veiled woman near the river stirred something ancient in the hearts of the villagers. Not fear, but reckoning. Those who once dismissed Agnes's disappearance as myth now spoke her name in hushed tones, with reverence and guilt. For many, she was no longer just a missing nun. She had become something else. A symbol, a witness, a spirit too powerful to be silenced. Children left candles by the river's edge. Elders crossed themselves when her name was mentioned. And through it all, the chapel remained sealed, not by law, but by fear. But Isabel couldn't rest. She returned to the stone shrine one last time, this time alone. She brought the strange Bible they had unearthed, wrapped in cloth and salt, as advised by a scholar of ancient rites. There was something she hadn't told anyone, a dream she'd been having. Always the same. Agnes standing at the altar, whispering in a language Isabel couldn't understand, holding out her hand as if offering or asking. When she opened the Bible to the marked page in her dream, she found the same passage in real life, highlighted in blood-red ink. When the river returns what was buried, the veil shall be lifted. She read it aloud. Once, twice. The forest remained still, eerily still. But then, the wind changed. It moved backward, pulling toward the river instead of away. The trees creaked. The ground vibrated beneath her feet. And somewhere deeper in the forest, something knocked. Not once, but 3 times. Slow, heavy, as if from within the earth itself. Isabel ran, not from fear, but from knowledge. Whatever she had awakened, it was never meant to rise again. Back in her home, she recorded everything. Her findings, her footage, her fears. She encrypted them, like she did with everything else. But before she could upload the files, power across the village cut out. The screens went dark. Phones died. The entire grid failed, except for one light. The bell tower. It flickered to life, its ancient gears grinding awake. The bell that hadn't rung in over 40 years began to move, swaying gently before releasing a single, mournful chime. And in that sound, every villager heard the same thing. Not warning, not welcome, but judgment. The next morning, the village awoke to silence, a different kind. The kind that comes after something unseen has passed through. The air was heavy, unmoving. The birds didn't sing. Dogs didn't bark. Even the river, normally restless and babbling, had gone still. And at the foot of the chapel steps, laid out perfectly as if placed by unseen hands, was a single white veil, drenched in river water. Isabel was gone, her house unlocked, her files wiped, the footage she had recorded, deleted from every drive and backup. Her name never made the news. Her face never reached the press. To the world outside, she had never existed. Just another whisper swallowed by the forest. But those who had known her, even briefly, felt it in their bones. She hadn't just vanished. She had taken someone's place. Tomas fell into silence after that day. He no longer spoke, no longer ate. He sat by the river every afternoon, staring into the water with glassy eyes. When asked what he saw, he would only whisper, "She's watching. She's waiting. And she's not alone anymore." He passed away 2 weeks later, peacefully, but with his hands wrapped around a rosary that wasn't his. The chapel doors reopened on their own. Not forced, not broken, just open. Inside, the altar had changed. The old cross was gone. In its place, the stone slab. Smooth, unmarked, but fresh with dirt, as if something beneath had been moved. Or buried again. No one dared enter. Not even the new priest sent from the city. He arrived, saw the chapel, and left without saying a word. And then, the final miracle, or curse, depending on who you asked. A new Bible appeared, placed neatly in the front pew. Inside the cover, in handwriting that matched the missing pages from Sister Agnes's journals, was a single sentence. Not all saints wear halos. Some wear silence, and some return. By now, the village had surrendered to the mystery. There were no more statements, no more denials, no more attempts to cover anything up. Something ancient had awakened, not just in the ground, but in the conscience of the people. Those who had stayed silent in 1979 now lived with a different kind of silence, the weight of truth. And in that weight, the chapel stood like a monument not to faith, but to unfinished stories. The children stopped playing near the river. Parents began teaching them a different version of the village's history, one where saints vanished, and where sacred places held dark memories. For the first time, fear wasn't superstition. It was inherited, generational, passed down not in stories, but in instinct. People avoided the bell tower. Even birds no longer nested there. One night, a villager named Elias, who had lost his sister in 1977 under mysterious circumstances, claimed he had dreamt of her. He said she was with Sister Agnes, both dressed in white, standing beneath the chapel, holding candles. "She forgave me," he said, tears streaming down his face. "But she said the others are still down there, still waiting to be heard." At first, people dismissed it as grief. But then others began having dreams too, different visions, but always the same feeling. Someone was trying to speak. And then the rain came. For 9 straight days, it poured, harder than anyone could remember. The river swelled. Roads collapsed. The ground around the chapel shifted. Trees fell. On the 10th day, the storm broke, and sunlight pierced through the fog like a blade. When the villagers emerged to assess the damage, they found something else. The land behind the chapel had caved in, revealing a tunnel. One that hadn't been mapped. One that no one had known existed. Or at least, that's what they said. The entrance was narrow, jagged, and raw. It looked less like a man-made passage, and more like a wound torn open by the earth itself. A small group gathered, torches in hand, hesitant to go in. But something compelled them. Not bravery, not curiosity, something deeper. Guilt, perhaps, or penance. Among them was Elias. He didn't ask permission. He simply went first. Inside, the air was different. Thick, wet, charged. The walls were lined with faint carvings, some familiar from previous discoveries, others entirely new. Human figures with no faces, kneeling before shapes that resembled altars or cages. At the tunnel's end, they reached a large chamber unlike the others. This one was round, silent, and in its center, a stone platform. Upon it, the unmistakable outline of a body, wrapped in cloth, with a rosary folded in her hands. It was Sister Agnes, or what was left of her. There were no signs of violence, no decay, no insects. Her body was preserved in a way that defied natural explanation, as if the earth had chosen not to consume her, as if she had been guarded. On the cloth beside her head, someone had written, "She knew." The group stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. And then, as if summoned, the bell above began to toll. Once, then again, but no one was in the tower. No one had been for weeks. The sound of the bell echoed through the valley like a cry from the past, deep, deliberate, undeniable. No wind stirred it. No rope pulled it. It simply moved, as if awakened by the discovery beneath the earth. The villagers who had followed Elias into the tunnel stood frozen, their torches flickering against the damp stone walls. No one dared speak, not out of fear, but reverence. Something sacred had been revealed, but it didn't feel holy. They wrapped Sister Agnes's body carefully, with hands that trembled not from horror, but from the weight of respect. They carried her out in silence. No authorities were called. No officials were informed. They didn't want this to become another file lost in some forgotten archive. This wasn't evidence. This was confession. From the earth. From history. From whatever force had allowed her to be found after all these years. They placed her in the chapel one final time. On the altar she once prayed before. Candles were lit, and though no priest dared officiate, the villagers stood in rows, heads bowed, tears falling. The doors remained open all night, and those who passed by said the air inside the chapel had changed. It no longer felt heavy. It no longer held shadows. It was as if, in death, she had reclaimed what had been taken from her in life. But the peace didn't last. 2 days later, a van arrived. No markings. No plates. 2 men stepped out, dressed not in uniforms but in tailored coats. They entered the chapel, spoke to no one, and emerged with a sealed black box. Some say it held her body. Others say it didn't. The van disappeared down the road and was never seen again. The candles inside the chapel blew out at that exact moment, and the bell never rang again. After that day, the village began to unravel. Slowly, quietly. The kind of unraveling that doesn't make headlines, but leaves a mark that never fades. The chapel was closed for good. The bishopric reassigned the region. No replacement was sent. Officially, the church cited structural instability as the reason for closure. But the villagers knew better. What was unstable wasn't the stone. It was the soul of the place. Elias was found dead weeks later. No signs of trauma. No suicide note. Just a peaceful look on his face and a folded page from Agnes's journal resting on his chest. It read, "Not everyone who goes below comes back the same. Some return as witnesses, others as warnings." His funeral was small, but the entire town watched from windows. They knew the truth, even if they couldn't name it. A group of outsiders, researchers, journalists, skeptics, came months later hoping to investigate. They were met with silence. Doors didn't open. Questions weren't answered. One of them claimed to have found the tunnel behind the chapel. But when he returned with a camera crew the next day, it was gone. The earth had sealed itself. No sign it had ever been there. No passage. No chamber. Just untouched grass. But late at night, some say you can still hear it. The bell. Not ringing, but humming. Like a voice held back by centuries. Trembling just beneath the surface of time. And near the river, where the boy once pulled her Bible from the reeds, flowers began to grow. Not wild ones, but lilies. White, pure, and always arranged in a circle. No one plants them. No one dares to pick them. As the months passed, the village slipped into a strange rhythm. Not quite fear, not quite calm. More like resignation. An understanding that what had been awakened would never fully return to sleep. The lilies by the river continued to bloom in perfect formation, even through frost. Children born after Agnes's disappearance would walk past them and instinctively lower their voices, as if they, too, knew. As if the memory of what happened had seeped into the bloodline. The schoolteacher, Anna, began collecting oral accounts from the elders. Stories they once kept locked away. Whispers of cloaked figures meeting in the fields during lunar eclipses. Unmarked books delivered in wooden crates to the chapel after midnight. One man remembered being taken into the cellar as a child, blindfolded, barefoot, made to repeat prayers he'd never heard before. When asked what he saw, his only reply was, "Not light, not dark, just something in between." Anna's notes grew into hundreds of pages. Testimonies, fragments, overlapping confessions. But when she tried to scan them into her computer, the files corrupted every time. Her printer jammed on page 79, the same year Agnes disappeared. Her lights flickered at exactly 3:07 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. She stopped sleeping, and then, one morning, she left town. No note, no goodbye. Only her journal remained, with the final entry scribbled in uneven handwriting. I heard her praying in the wall. The chapel remained untouched, but its windows told a different story. Some nights, lights could be seen flickering inside. No candles, no electricity, just movement, a faint glow, a silhouette kneeling before the altar. Those brave enough to look claimed it was a woman, head bowed, hands folded, always the same posture, always the same silence. And every time they blinked, she was gone. It wasn't a haunting. Not exactly. It was something else, like a presence reminding the village that peace hadn't come freely, that truth always has a price, and that the price had not yet been fully paid. Soon after, the river itself began to change. It no longer flowed as it once did. Its path narrowed, the water darkened, the current slowed as if dragging something too heavy to carry. Fishermen reported strange catches, not fish but objects, pieces of wood with symbols burned into them, old rings, a rosary with blackened beads. One even pulled up a hand mirror wrapped in cloth, its glass shattered inward, as if it had imploded. The mayor attempted to drain part of the riverbank for maintenance. The morning after the project began, all the machinery was found submerged. No footprints, no signs of vandalism, just rusted engines and silence. The crew never returned. The river was left alone after that. Locals said it was better that way. Let it keep its dead. Tomas once said before he passed. The living have already done enough. The town square, once the heart of the community, grew quieter with each passing week. Shops closed. The school shortened its hours. Tourism vanished. Yet no one wanted to leave. Not out of loyalty, but out of duty, as if abandoning the village would be a betrayal. Not of place, but of memory. Sister Agnes had died here, and in some way she had won. Her truth had surfaced. Her silence had spoken. But the church still hadn't spoken a word. No statement, no inquiry, no exorcist. Only paperwork. Vague, redacted, sent to civil offices claiming closure due to structural hazard. When one reporter from the city attempted to dig deeper, he vanished 3 days after arriving. His car was found by the edge of the woods. Inside, his camera was melted. His notebook, empty. The village learned, once again, that some stories don't want to be told. Some truths are not merely uncovered. They are released. And once they rise, they watch. It was on the anniversary of Sister Agnes's disappearance, 45 years to the day, that something new happened. At dawn, just before the sun touched the chapel steeple, a sound echoed through the village. Not the bell, not footsteps. It was humming. Low, female, familiar. A tune that older villagers recognized instantly. It was the hymn Agnes used to sing during morning prayers. The one she sang to calm children. The one she sang the day she vanished. The humming came from the chapel, but no one was inside. The doors were still locked. The pews untouched. The air inside smelled of lilies and damp stone. But no voice. No person. Only the echo. The melody lingered for nearly 7 minutes, then stopped. And in its place, silence returned with a heaviness that clung to every window, every soul. Later that same day, the Bible, the one recovered from the river, was stolen. It had been kept locked in a display case at the village archives, preserved behind glass. No sign of forced entry. No shattered pane. Just gone. In its place was something else. A note, scrawled in tight, feminine handwriting. I warned them. I showed them. Now I carry the rest. People whispered that Agnes had taken it back. Others said it was a final warning. A reminder that the story was not over, only paused. The archivist who discovered the note quit her job that night and left the village without explanation. Her resignation letter said only one thing. She forgives. But the others won't. That evening, candles were lit on every windowsill. Not by tradition, not by ceremony, but by instinct. The village understood that something had returned, and this time, it didn't want justice. It wanted balance. After the humming and the missing Bible, strange patterns began to emerge. People who had denied knowing anything about the chapel's history began to fall ill, not in ways doctors could explain. Fatigue, memory loss, night terrors. One woman, the niece of the former mayor, was found wandering the forest barefoot, muttering Agnes's name. When asked what happened, she looked straight ahead and said, "She walks behind me." Villagers began to speak less and watch more. Eyes turned toward the chapel every evening, waiting for movement. And some swore they saw it, a faint silhouette pacing behind the stained glass, kneeling, then rising, then gone. No footprints, no broken locks, just presence, constant, heavy, like someone never really left. The most chilling change, however, came from the children. They began drawing things they couldn't explain, spirals, red-robed figures, candles melting upside down. One child scribbled a picture of a woman with no face holding a Bible and standing in water. When asked where she saw it, she answered plainly, "In my sleep." She said to draw it before I forget. Teachers started keeping journals of the things their students whispered during nap time. Phrases like "he's still under the stone," and "she sang to keep the bones quiet." None of them knew what it meant, but everyone felt the chill behind the words. It became clear that Sister Agnes's story was never meant to stay buried, that the river had not returned her Bible by chance, that silence is not the same as peace, and that some voices, when ignored for long enough, do not fade. They echo. The village council, or what was left of it, attempted one final act of control. They called for the chapel to be demolished, quietly, without ceremony, without warning. The order was signed under the pretense of public safety, citing foundational erosion and the mental strain it had placed on the population. But the truth was simpler. They were afraid. Afraid of what still lingered behind those stone walls. Afraid that the building itself had memory. The demolition crew arrived at dawn. Strangers, outsiders, hired to get it done quickly, efficiently, no questions asked. But they hadn't been on site more than an hour when the first one ran screaming from the chapel's interior, covered in ash. He claimed the walls were whispering, that he saw someone inside, a woman in white, praying at the altar, unmoving even when he shouted. The rest of the crew refused to go in. The project was canceled within 24 hours. Officially, equipment failure, unstable foundation. But villagers who passed by that morning said otherwise. The chapel looked different, not broken, but awake. The air around it had changed, colder, denser, and carved into the wood of the chapel door, a message that hadn't been there the night before. If you tear down what I protected, what I held back will rise. After that, no one spoke of demolition again. Instead, they began leaving offerings at the chapel steps, flowers, Bibles, old rosaries, children's drawings. Not out of fear, but out of something closer to reverence. As if the village had stopped resisting the truth. As if they had finally understood that Sister Agnes wasn't just a victim. She was a guardian, and her silence was protection. And still, the sightings continued. One man, a traveler passing through, unaware of the village's past, claimed to see a woman walking across the river surface at dusk. He thought it was a trick of the light, until she turned her head and vanished. Others, especially those with ties to the chapel's darkest years, began dreaming in unison. The same dream, shared across different households, described a room filled with water, with a single book floating in the center, pages turning on their own, bleeding ink into the flood. The dreams left them exhausted, haunted. A few moved away without explanation. Those who stayed began writing down their dreams each morning, collecting them like pieces of a forgotten gospel. Some pages matched Agnes's old journal fragments, line for line, word for word. People who had never met her, dreaming her exact prayers. The children, once just passive observers of the mystery, now seemed tied to it. One boy, barely 6, walked into the chapel alone one afternoon. When his mother found him minutes later, he was sitting in the front pew, silent, eyes fixed on the altar. When asked what he was doing, he said, "She told me to wait. She's coming back with the others." That night, the bell rang 3 times. No one was in the tower. The gears had long rusted. The rope was cut, and yet it rang. After the bell tolled 3 times, no one in the village slept. Doors remained locked. Lights stayed on. Some prayed. Others simply waited, unable to explain why the air felt heavier, or why the ground itself seemed to hum beneath their feet. At exactly 3:33 a.m., every candle in the chapel reignited on its own. The light glowed through the stained glass, casting colors across the empty pews. But those who dared look through the windows swore they saw shadows seated there, still, silent, as if attending a midnight mass held by no priest. And in the center aisle was her, Sister Agnes. Her figure, unmistakable, moved slowly toward the altar, head bowed, hands clasped in prayer. She paused only once, at the place where her Bible had first been found decades later. Then she knelt, and as the candles flickered in rhythm with her breath, the shadows behind her leaned forward, not threateningly, not menacingly, but in reverence, as if they had waited for this moment, as if they had always belonged to her. When the sun rose, the chapel was empty again, but the lilies outside had multiplied, now covering the entire front steps. Dozens of them, untouched by weather or animals. And on the chapel door, a handprint, wet, small, delicate, pressed into the wood like a seal. That morning, the oldest resident of the village, a woman who had been a child when Agnes disappeared, was found peacefully passed away in her bed. On her pillow was a single note in unfamiliar handwriting. "The silence is over." She spoke for all of us. Today, the village remains, quieter than most. The chapel still stands, its doors open only during the early hours of morning. People enter alone. They don't speak. They don't kneel. They simply sit, listening. Some emerge weeping, others smiling, all changed in ways they can't explain. No sermons are delivered, no rites performed, but everyone who enters claims to hear one voice, gentle, clear, and unmistakably hers. No one dares touch the altar anymore. It is no longer marble, but stone, not carved by hand, but shaped by time. And beneath it, encased in glass, rests a new Bible, bound in deep red cloth, its pages untouched. On the first page, a message. When the faithful are forgotten, they do not fade. They rise. There are no more attempts to explain what happened. The village has learned that not all stories need answers. Some need witnesses, and some need remembering. Tourists occasionally arrive, drawn by rumors or stories they found online. They take pictures, walk the grounds, but the locals watch them carefully, because those who do not respect the silence do not stay long. And every year, on the anniversary of Sister Agnes's disappearance, the bell rings once, just once, at exactly 3:07 a.m. Not a warning, not a haunting, a reminder. In the years that followed, Sister Agnes became more than memory. She became a force, a presence embedded not just in the chapel walls, but in the rhythm of the village itself. Her face never appeared in visions. Her name was never shouted, but the shape of her absence carved out a kind of reverence that no sermon ever could. People spoke less about what she suffered and more about what she preserved. Children began learning her story, not from textbooks, but from the way their parents paused when they passed the chapel, from the way candles were placed by the river without needing to be asked, from the way silence was honored, not feared, as something holy. Agnes had become the village's compass, and whether they understood the full truth or not, they followed her. Some say a new nun arrived once, unannounced, dressed in simple garments, carrying nothing but a weathered journal and a silver cross. She asked no questions, made no demands, simply sat in the back row of the chapel for 3 days. And then she left. No one spoke to her, but every person who saw her swore she walked exactly the same way Agnes once did. And outside the chapel, where she sat, lilies bloomed overnight. Not everyone believes the stories. Outsiders still scoff. Skeptics still search for cracks in the myth. But those who stay, those who live in the silence, who walk the path Sister Agnes once walked, know better. Because belief isn't about proof. It's about presence. And hers never left. And even now, sometimes at dusk, the wind carries the sound of pages turning, even when no one is holding a book. There is a journal kept at the back of the chapel now, left open for visitors to write in. No one guards it. No one reads it aloud, but it never disappears. Some write prayers. Others write dreams. Some leave drawings. And once, just once, a child who had never spoken a word in his life scribbled a single phrase across an entire page. She forgives what the others can't. That sentence spread quietly through the village. People didn't question how he knew the words. They just understood. Forgiveness had become the final thread in Agnes's legacy. Not the absence of justice, but the reclaiming of voice. Her silence had protected the truth. Her return had forced it to rise. But her forgiveness, that was what allowed the village to remain. The chapel bell, long silent outside the annual toll, rang unexpectedly one morning. A soft chime, gentle, as if marking not an event, but a passage. That same day, a letter appeared on the chapel altar. No envelope, no signature, just a sheet of parchment, written in careful, elegant handwriting. The dead has been spoken. Let those above remember what those below endured. After that, the chapel changed once more. Light filtered through the stained glass differently, warmer, softer. The pews, once empty, began to fill again, not with ceremonies, but with silence. A sacred silence, one that didn't demand answers, only remembrance. And from that day forward, no one entered the chapel without first removing their shoes. Not out of tradition, but because they knew they were stepping on holy ground. The journal at the back of the chapel began to fill faster than anyone expected, not just with messages from villagers, but from people across the country, some who had heard whispers of the place, others who claimed to have dreamed of it without ever knowing its name. They arrived in silence, stayed for hours, and left behind words that all carried the same weight: grief and release. One woman wrote of a child she had lost, and how she'd seen Sister Agnes holding him in a dream, rocking him gently beside the river. A man who had never set foot in a church wept as he left a folded photo of his estranged mother on the altar. A teenager wrote a single line, "I don't feel afraid here," and that, more than anything else, began to redefine the village's identity. It was no longer just a place marked by disappearance. It had become refuge. The air around the chapel grew softer. The lilies no longer bloomed only on anniversaries, but throughout the year. Some were even found growing in unexpected places, near the school's entrance, beside the bakery, in the cracks of an old stone wall near the river. Wherever they appeared, people paused, not with questions, but with gratitude, as if Agnes was still guiding the village, one bloom at a time. Yet even amid peace, reminders lingered. The bell never rang more than once. The tunnel beneath the chapel remained sealed, and each year, one candle on the altar extinguished itself precisely at 3:07 a.m. No breeze, no movement, just gone, as though a name had been called, as though someone had answered. And while the village moved on, rebuilt, and quietly healed, no one forgot what had been buried. Because Sister Agnes had not returned to haunt, she had returned to remind. Now, decades later, the story of Sister Agnes continues, not in headlines, not in books, but in whispers passed between generations. Her name is never spoken lightly. Her chapel never entered in haste, and the silence she left behind is kept not as a burden, but as a gift. The silence of a truth that refused to die. The silence of justice delivered without violence. The silence of someone who dared to protect others, even in death. There is no plaque honoring her, no statue, no shrine carved in stone. But if you ask anyone in the village where she is, they'll point to the river, to the lilies, to the light that moves through the chapel windows in the shape of someone kneeling. And they'll say, "She's here. She always has been." Visitors come and go. Some leave changed. Others leave confused. But none leave untouched. And those who try to explain the story logically, who demand proof, who trace timelines, who question how a Bible could survive 4 decades in a river, always seem to lose something after they leave. A detail, a memory, a sense of certainty. As if the chapel strips away what you think you know, and leaves only what your heart can carry. The final entry in the chapel's journal, written in a hand no one has been able to identify, simply says this: "Some saints are never canonized. They are remembered in petals, in echoes, in rivers, and sometimes in silence that sings. And just beneath that, a single pressed lily, still white, still perfect, still watching. Over time, people stopped asking what really happened to Sister Agnes, not because they no longer cared, but because the question itself had become sacred. It was no longer about solving a mystery, but about honoring a truth that chose to reveal a painless fragments of S.I. Mesma. The chapel was never reopened for official masses, and no clergy was ever permanently reassigned to the village. It was understood now. This was a place governed not by hierarchy, but by memory. New children were born, and though they never knew her, they spoke her name with unexplainable familiarity. Some claimed they saw her in their dreams, always near the river, always holding an open book with blank pages. When asked what she said, the children gave different answers, but each carried the same message: tell the truth, even if you must do it quietly. Every spring, the lilies returned, now spreading beyond the village. Botanists couldn't explain it. Their species didn't match any local variety, but no one dared pluck them. A girl once tried, gently pulling one from the ground by the river. That night, she had a dream. A woman in white placed the lily back in her hand and whispered, "Let them bloom where they were needed." And so they did. Wherever silence had once hidden pain, the lilies bloomed. At the old schoolhouse, by the gravestones of forgotten names, at the edge of the woods where Tomas was last seen. It was as if Agnes had become the caretaker, not just of the chapel, but of the whole village's wounds. There is now a path, simple, made of stone and grass, that leads from the chapel to the river. It's called the Line of Light. No one built it officially. It simply appeared, one small step at a time, pressed into the ground by countless feet over the years. Those who walk it rarely speak. Most hold something in their hands, a photo, a letter, a name written on a scrap of paper. At the river's edge, they kneel, not to mourn, but to remember. Some say Sister Agnes speaks to them there, not in words, but in wind, in warmth, in a sudden ripple across the surface of the water. And they return to the village changed, not healed completely, but no longer alone with what they carry. As if someone else had taken a part of their burden and whispered, "I'll keep this with me." One old man, who had once been a boy when she vanished, finally spoke at her riverbank after years of silence. He said, "She didn't disappear. She stepped between us and something we didn't see coming." Then he placed his walking stick in the water, turned, and never returned to the chapel again. Not because he stopped believing, but because he finally understood. And sometimes, understanding is the most sacred closure we ever receive. In recent years, a quiet movement began outside the village. Strangers who had once visited the chapel returned to their own towns, changed. Some started small chapels of silence. Others taught children to listen before they spoke. A few, the ones most deeply marked, began writing stories. Stories not about Sister Agnes directly, but about women who waited, about faith that didn't seek applause, about rivers that returned what time tried to erase. One story, published anonymously in a city miles away, described a nun who walked barefoot through a burning village and left no ash in her path. Another told of a woman whose prayers could turn smoke into birds. Each tale different, yet all carried one shared signature: a pressed lily, drawn in ink or carved into the corner of the page, as if Agnes had seated herself not just in memory, but in myth. Back in the village, the journal at the back of the chapel had run out of pages, but no one replaced it. Instead, people began writing their messages directly on the walls. Gentle words, soft prayers, memories whispered in fading ink. It didn't matter if they overlapped. What mattered was that they stayed. The chapel had become a breathing archive of sorrow, forgiveness, and rebirth. One night, a woman who had never spoken in public before stood at the chapel door and read aloud every message written on those walls. Her voice cracked. Her knees trembled, but she finished. And when she did, the entire village stood in silence for over 10 minutes, not out of confusion, but out of awe, as if every word she spoke had echoed through time, as if Agnes had spoken through her. Legends say that one day, no one knows when, the river will give back something else. Not an object, not a book, but something living. No one knows if this means Agnes herself, or perhaps the one secret she never shared. But when asked about it, The oldest villagers simply smile and say, "The river keeps its promises." Children now walk freely between the chapel and the river, often barefoot, humming melodies no adult taught them. Some say the melody changes with the season. Others say it changes with the listener's heart. But everyone agrees on one thing: it brings peace. The kind that sinks into your bones without needing explanation. The kind that makes you stay still just a little longer than you planned. In one particularly cold winter, when the river nearly froze, an old woman slipped and fell at its edge. When help arrived, she was laughing. Not from shock, not from fear, but from joy. She claimed that just before she fell, she had seen a woman standing on the water, holding a Bible wrapped in red cloth. She didn't say anything, the woman said, but I remembered everything. The chapel never froze. Even in the coldest seasons, warmth could always be felt near its heart, around the altar, within the stone, inside the wood of the benches. And some believe that was Agnes's final miracle, not surviving, but staying. And maybe that's all she ever wanted. Not to be found, not to be praised, but to never be forgotten. Years passed, and the village changed slowly, not with expansion or renovation, but with quiet endurance. The chapel was never renovated. Its cracks remained. The wood creaked more each season, but no one dared restore it. It was said that to touch the scars would be to erase the voice of what had been endured. Agnes's absence had become a kind of presence, one that asked nothing, yet gave everything. On the 44th anniversary of her disappearance, the river rose unexpectedly, not with violence, but gently, reverently, like a procession. It reached the steps of the chapel and then receded by morning, leaving no damage. Only a single item placed on the altar stone, a lock of hair wrapped in parchment, tied with a strand of worn linen. No one claimed it. No one touched it. But someone wrote in chalk near the altar, "She returns in pieces, so we may carry her together." That phrase stayed. Eventually, it was carved into a wooden plaque above the chapel door. Not as a motto, but as a reminder. Because the truth was clear now, Sister Agnes never truly disappeared. She fractured herself across the souls of those she protected. And now, wherever compassion bloomed, wherever silence healed, wherever truth was carried quietly, she was there. The lilies still bloom. The river still whispers. The journal, now sealed in glass, rests near the pulpit, and new children still speak her name with reverence, not because they are told to, but because something within them remembers her, as if she is less a person and more a thread woven into the human heart. And though no one waits for miracles anymore, they still prepare, quietly, lovingly, because when you've been visited once by someone who walks between heaven and river, you never lock the door again. The village is not on any map. No signs point to its roads. GPS doesn't track its chapel. But people find it, always at the exact moment they need it. Some arrive broken. Some arrive numb. Some don't even know why they've come until they place a hand on the chapel's cold stone wall and feel something ancient exhale behind it. Not words, not answers, just presence. A young boy once asked his grandmother if the story of Sister Agnes was real. She smiled softly and said, "She is real every time someone listens without judgment, every time someone forgives without being asked, every time someone carries pain without bitterness. That's when she's most real." In the quiet of the chapel, when all is still, a sound can sometimes be heard, barely a whisper, like the turning of pages, or the brushing of linen against stone. Some say it's the wind. Others know better, because faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the softest voice in the darkest place. And that is where Agnes has always lived. No ending was ever written for her story, because no ending was needed. She didn't vanish. She transformed into legend, into silence, into the hands of those who still carry light, even when they cannot see the path ahead. And if you ever find yourself standing beside a river, unsure of where to go or what to believe, listen. The water remembers. The lilies remain. And somewhere in the hush between heartbeats, she is still praying for you. There are stories that fade with time, worn down by memory, lost in noise, swallowed by the next tragedy. But then there are stories like Sister Agnes's, stories that do not demand attention but earn it, not through spectacle, but through silence, through a river that refuses to forget, through a chapel that continues to breathe, through a single Bible that surfaced decades later, whispering everything no one dared say aloud. What began as a disappearance became a declaration. That presence does not always require form, and justice does not always come in noise. Agnes showed the world, without ever speaking, that sacrifice can echo louder than survival. That a single act of courage, hidden behind a wall for years, can shape generations. And that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that never screamed, but endured. As you sit now, perhaps still trying to understand how a single woman's story could ripple across time, remember this: we are all, in some way, walking beside our own rivers, carrying wounds, truths, and questions we dare not voice. But what if the silence around us is not emptiness, but invitation? What if the echoes are not ghosts, but guides? Stories like this aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be carried. And somewhere in your life, whether today or years from now, you'll find a moment when everything Sister Agnes stood for will rise within you. In how you listen, in how you forgive, in how you protect someone who may never know your name. That is when her story becomes yours. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a sense of wonder, don't let it fade. Share it. Keep it alive. And if you felt that silence, that sacred stillness, then let this be the beginning, not the end. Subscribe to this channel, leave your thoughts below, and be part of the voices that refuse to let stories like hers disappear again. Because some truths deserve to be remembered, not just with words, but with hearts wide open.